our son Jake, I think, owns the world record for the number of times he has watched through an entire season, the entire series, I should say, of The Office. But have you ever done that? Have you ever watched a movie like all the way through, and then, or maybe a TV series, and you watch it all the way through, and then sometime later you go back and you rewatch it. The first time you watch the movie and you don't know how it ends, you're kind of you're anxious to know how it ends, and the ending may surprise you. There may be something that you thought was going to happen and it didn't happen, or maybe someone you thought was the bad guy wasn't the bad guy, is actually the good guy. But you kind of watch it that first time, and you know when you get to a certain point in the movie, the tension's there, and you have to wait till the end for it to get resolved. But then let's say you watch the same movie, maybe you want someone else to see it, and so you watch it with them 2, 3, 4 weeks later. That tension is no longer there for you. You know how the movie ends, and so when there are points of tension along the way, it doesn't throw you off. It doesn't keep you in suspense because you know how the story ends. If I were being honest, I would say that when it comes to Good Friday, that's kind of how I feel. Now, that's not to say that I don't appreciate the sacrifice of Jesus, nor does it mean that I don't think it's important for us to stop and to pause and to at least once a year really ponder the sacrifice of Jesus. I think we should do that. But it does have a very dark tone to Good Friday. But since I know the end of the story, I can't be completely sad about the events of Good Friday, completely. Because I know that as horrible as the events were, as horrendous as the suffering was, as great as the pain was, I know that a couple of days later, 3 days later, Jesus overcame all of that and he rose from the dead. I know how his story ends. And because of that, I can look at Good Friday differently. Now, imagine that if we did not know how his story ended, if we did not know that there was a resurrection, or if the resurrection was not real. The Apostle Paul said we would of all men most to be pitied. But we do know how it all ends. In fact, before his death, Jesus told us how it would end. In this last I am statement that we look at here on this Good Friday, I feel it proper for this to be the last one we look at because it's going to lead us into Sunday. We're going to read from John chapter 11, where Jesus makes the claim to be the resurrection and the life. John chapter 11, beginning in verse 17. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, less than 2 miles away. Many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. As soon as Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Then Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Yet even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." "Your brother will rise again," Jesus told her. Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." And listen to what Jesus said, verse 25. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life." It's the second time Jesus said the life. Did you catch that? The previous I am statement, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And here again he says I'm the life, but he precedes this instance with saying I am the resurrection and the life, eternal life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies physically, will live spiritually. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Now there, he's not talking about physical death, he's talking about spiritual death. Those who believe in Jesus will never die spiritually. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world. As with every other I am statement, Jesus cannot make it more plain when he says, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, that one will live. In a couple of days, we're going to gather and celebrate the resurrection on Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday. And as we think about the resurrection of Jesus, as we think about his claim to be the resurrection and the life, we know this claim is true. Because after he makes this claim, he ends up dying on the cross on Good Friday. But that's not the end of his story. He is the resurrection and the life. Here's the impact that Jesus, as the resurrection and the life, has on us. And I want you to think of it in terms of tenses: past, present, and future. Jesus being the resurrection and the life, that means that your past doesn't have to define you. What you were does not mean that's what you always will be, because the resurrection has the power to change things. It changed them literally, physically in our text. The background of our text is that a friend of Jesus named Lazarus had died. And Lazarus had been dead for several days. In fact, you see what one of his sisters says when Martha says to Jesus in verse 21, Martha said, "Lord, if you had been here, this would not have happened." Lord, something happened in the past, and that past was defining these sisters. Their lives were now marked by the death of their brother. But Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and life. I can cause life to come where there is death. I could change the trajectory of your life so that the past does not define you." Now understand, none of us can change our past. And nowhere does God or Jesus promise to undo our past actions. You may still be living with consequences today for something that you decided to do years ago. We're not saying that the past is undone. We're saying that the past does not define you. You are not what you have done. Have you made mistakes in your past? You're not those mistakes. Have you messed up in the past? You're not defined by those mess ups. Have you been addicted to something in the past? That addiction doesn't define you. Have you failed in some relationship in the past? That failure does not define you. Because of the resurrection, because Jesus makes all things new, the past does not define you. And so the past is now behind us. Let's think about the present. Because Jesus is the resurrection and the life, not only does our past not define us, but our present can be filled with faith. Our present experiences, the things that we experience now, our lives can be filled with faith. I want you to hear what Martha said after she expresses in verse 21 her angst over the past when she says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." She then says in verse 22, "But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." Martha said, "I know, I've got faith that whatever you ask of God, he will give you." If we have faith in a risen Lord, if we trust that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, that means that he's alive today. That means that the tomb is empty. And if Jesus is alive today, that means he makes an impact on today. If Jesus is alive today, that means that he can change what's happening today. If Jesus is alive today, that means that whatever happens today does not define us or defeat us or destroy us. We can have faith, a life filled with faith today, because Jesus is alive. As long as Jesus is alive, the object of our faith will be alive. And that means that today we can have faith in God and in what God can do. Maybe you're needing God to do something in your life. Maybe you're needing God to step into a situation. Maybe you're needing God to intervene in somehow, some way. You can have faith that he can do that because guess what? He's alive. He's alive and he's powerful. And he's able to step into situations today. Just as he stepped into this situation back in John chapter 11, he can step into your situation because he is the resurrection and the life. So our past doesn't have to define us, and our present can be filled with faith, but this also speaks to our future. Because Jesus is the resurrection and the life, hope for the future can impact our present. We have a hope for the future because Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Now, we use the term hope quite flippantly. We use it for various things like, I hope my team wins. I hope this happens. I hope that doesn't happen. And we're just kind of tossing up maybe a prayer or some luck will happen that something does or doesn't occur, and it may or may not occur. That's not the biblical concept of hope. The biblical concept of hope is a confident expectation based upon what has been said and stated. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and life. That brings hope for our future. This is explained to us in verses 23 through 26, where Jesus said to Martha, your brother's going to rise again. And Martha said, I know he'll rise in the resurrection of the last day. I've got that hope for the future. And Jesus said to her, I'm the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, whenever we die, when we die, we shall still live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Now again, when he says we'll never die, he's not talking about physical death because we will all die because of sin. He's talking about spiritual death. There'll never be a time in our lives, in our future, when we are separated from God because Jesus is the resurrection and life. Your future is as secure as your resurrected Jesus is. And that's pretty secure. So our past doesn't define us, and our present can be filled with faith, and we have hope for the future. And that hope can impact our present reality, and it should. That hope should impact how we live life now. If I know that my Redeemer lives and that I will see him on the last day, that changes how I live today. And it doesn't allow how I lived yesterday to define me. Now the question is, that I want to leave you with is the same question that Jesus asked Martha. He said in verse 26, the last part of the verse, do you believe this? Do you, my friend, really believe that Jesus is the resurrection and the life? Do you really believe that he is all of these I ams that we have looked at today? Because he is the resurrection and the life. But that truth, that reality will not make a difference in your life unless you choose to believe it. So I'll leave you with that question. Do you believe that Jesus is the resurrection and life? Do you believe that he's alive today and that because he's alive, your past cannot define you? Let's move past it. Let's go forward. Do you really believe because he's the resurrection and the life that you can have faith on this day that he's at work in you and your situation? Do you have faith that Jesus is the resurrection and the life so that the future hope that you have impacts you today? I believe that he's the resurrection and the life, and I hope that you believe that he is the resurrection and the life. In fact, I can't wait to see in a couple of days when we gather together at this place called First Baptist Church Milton, and we give worship, honor, and praise to the resurrection and the life. He is risen. He is alive, and we're going to celebrate that this Sunday, and we'll allow that truth to impact our lives for the rest of our days. God bless you. I look forward to seeing you in a couple of days as we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus.